How's everybody doing? Good. You sound great. Hey, just a little heads up. We normally like our services to last 60 to 65 minutes or so. Today, I'm going to make sure that we're done 5 minutes early. And the reason for being done 5 minutes early is that for about 80% of you, you don't know who you are yet, but about 80% of you, you're going to get an early dismissal. You're going to get to walk out those doors 5 minutes early, hang out in the commons, find a next step. It'll be awesome. But for about 20% of you, I hope, you'll come down front when I'm done, and I'll explain why. And just in this little kind of front center section here, I just want to have a 5-minute meeting to tell you about an opportunity here. And if you're the kind of person who's thought at all, like, I'd like to make some friends here at Suncrest. I'd like to know some more people relationally. Or you're just the kind of person who's like, I'd like to help people know some other people relationally and make some friends. That 5-minute meeting is for you. So I'll go over that again at the end, but just a heads up for where we're going today. I love to use the month of July as kind of a time of reflection. I think it's a healthy thing to step back from where you are, reflect on life and faith and all those sorts of things. And many of you know, if you get my weekly email, the note from Greg, I've been doing a fair amount of traveling, had some really cool experiences. And over the last 2 weeks, I went out with my son. We drove to South Dakota and Wyoming. We did some hiking. We did some camping together. There will be future stories and future messages that come out of that experience for sure. Then I got to go up last week to Montana and met with a young woman who's from our church and now doing campus ministry out there. And then the main reason for my trip was I was at a retreat with some other pastors in Montana, and we experienced some really remarkable things. I'm just really grateful for voices in my life and to have a camaraderie like that with other pastors. And that, of course, in itself kind of gives you a chance for reflection. But I knew then I had a long drive home from Montana. I have been to 48 of the 50 states. I'd never been to North Dakota, so I'm definitely driving through North Dakota on the way home. I had a meeting in Minneapolis, and I just kind of pictured it this way. Like, okay, after experiencing all of that, I got this 12-hour drive last Friday from Montana to North Dakota. Now, some of you know, I have a van that I love a little too much. When I left for this trip, this van had 325,000 miles on it. We bought this van just after my daughter was born, and she just finished her freshman year of college, okay? Now, if you went out in our parking lot, you wouldn't be able to pick out my van because it looks great. It looks awesome. You think it looks junky? It doesn't. It's fantastic. Rides smooth, all those sorts of things. I had people question me, Greg, are you going to take that van to Montana? Of course I'm going to take that van to Montana. So I'm driving in this beginning of this 12-hour drive, Montana, North Dakota, through Minnesota. And in Montana, the speed limit's 80 miles an hour, which means I'm driving a little over 80 miles an hour. And I'm going down the interstate. I'm noticing as I'm trying to listen to my podcast that sometimes I have service on my phone, sometimes I don't. And as I crest one of the hills in Montana, all of a sudden, every gauge on my van goes crazy, right? And I'm like, oh, this is not good. I hit the gas. There was nothing. I'm like, all right, we're going to jam this in neutral. We're going to slide to a stop. We're going to figure it out. Luckily, I had a little bit of service, and I noticed that 1 mile up ahead, there's a town called Webo, Montana. It's as small as it sounds, okay? But there is a service station there. I get the van, driving just real slow into the service station. Walk in. I'm like, oh, I hope there's a mechanic here. I walk in. The lady behind the counter says to me, it was a hot day. She's like, it's hotter than a hooker in Vegas out there, isn't it? I said, yes, ma'am. I guess it is. I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I don't know whether it is or not. But is there a mechanic around? Because I'm having a little trouble with my van. And she's like, yeah, there's a guy here. He comes and looks at it. He's like, this is out of my league. He's like, it kind of smells like transmission. I'm like, that's not what I want to hear, right? He's like, but I can't fix it. You need to get to Dixon or some town in North Dakota. I said, well, how far is that? He said, 60 miles. I'm like, you think I can make it to Dickinson? He's like, well, 50-50 chance. So I start my way. He actually gave me the phone number of someone who could help me with roadside assistance if I needed to. He said, don't go over 60 miles an hour. I made it there. He's like, if you get there, you can rent a car to get home the rest of the way. There's a junkyard you can leave your van at. Like there's lots of options. But I get there and I do find a mechanic. Had to kind of sweet talk to get in, and they plug it into their machine and they look at it and it's not the transmission. It just had a little glitch. He actually told me, he's like, the anti-lock braking system looks like it thinks your van was off the ground for a little while. I'm like, it was not. I wasn't going that fast. And anyway, I asked him, I'm like, hey, I'm going back to Indiana. Do you think this van is going to make it? He's like, probably a 50-50 chance. or so. But I'm by myself. It's not like I have one of my kids with me or something like that. I'll try this. And I made it just fine. But that was a long story for a small point, that this drive that was kind of supposed to be reflective for me really wasn't all that reflective. Now I'm just watching the gauges and all those sorts of things. But I did still take some time. And for me, and I like to do this with you too. If you were with us last July, I did this exact same thing with you. I like to kind of just think of some big categories of life, important categories of life, and say, how am I doing, right? And just be honest about it. If I'm not doing that well, how do I take steps forward? So I have 3 categories that I think about. I want to ask you to think about those same things as well. Am I being responsible? Am I being relational? Am I being spiritual? And I just do this on a scale of 1 to 10. Can I ask you all, this is your little version of what I get to do each July. If you were to say on a scale of 1 to 10, are you responsible in a healthy way? Are you relational in a healthy way? And are you spiritual in a healthy way? Let me give you a little grid. If you're like a 10 in responsible, and none of you are, because none of us is perfect. If you're a 10, you're the person who returns every email, RSVPs for things when you should, always follows through, never misses a deadline. Like you take care of other people. You're just responsible all the time. So just real quick, think about yourself. Are you living a responsible life? Scale of 1 to 10, where are you? Okay? Relational. Now, if you're a 10 relationally, you are the kind of person, and none of you are, because 10 is perfect. You're the kind of person who knows what to say in every situation. You know how to handle every situation. You're a perfectly hospitable person. You love people, and all kinds of people love you. They feel encouraged by you. You're able to coach someone through difficult things, and they still like you afterwards. Like you just have relational skills if you're 10. But just be honest. Relational. If nobody loves you, you're like a 2, okay? Maybe a 1. How are you doing relationally? That's a big deal in our faith. How are your relationships? And then spiritually. Of course, spiritual is does your life look like Jesus? What would a 10 be spiritually? It would be Jesus, right? So none of you are a 10. But just to think about, is my life looking like Jesus? Jesus cultivated this trust relationship with God, and Jesus, gave his life to service. We say contribute by serving. Jesus, connected in life-changing relationships. Relationships was a big part. Jesus cared about lost people, and he invested in them. How are you doing? Scale of 1 to 10. And I just think each year, if we could step back and kind of ask ourselves, that could make us really healthy. So we're in this series about parables, and the parable that I want to teach today that Jesus told, it will definitely also cause you to have a little bit of a reflective experience. It's actually kind of that nature. Parables are stories that Jesus told. It's interesting that a lot of times the audience matters. A few weeks ago when I was teaching, I talked about the crowds and the disciples, and the audience definitely matters in this parable. You'll see that in just a moment. But the most important thing to see in parables are the characters that Jesus creates when he tells these fables or these stories. And the idea is that you are one of them, and you just have to figure out which one you are, and then you'll know kind of your next steps from there. And one of the things about parables when Jesus is telling stories is that sometimes because it's a story, it kind of jostles you a little bit. And sometimes it's gentle. It's kind of it just makes you, how you kind of just cock your head a little bit okay, I can see that. Sometimes it's more than just kind of cocking your head. Sometimes it just blows your mind. It's I never saw it that way before, but when Jesus told the story, it helped me to see it. Sometimes when Jesus tells a story, and this is my experience with this parable, it's I want to disagree with Jesus, right? He says something, and I'm no, that's not the way the world is. That's not the way I am. That's not the way the world adds up. And I think one of the most interesting things about your spiritual life is what you do when you disagree with Jesus. If you think he should come around to your way of thinking, or whether you think, I disagree, I actually think he's wrong, but he's never wrong. So I guess I need to adjust. And then maybe the best part about the parables is a lot of times they come in kind of a side door. And they get our guards down a little bit, and they help us see the truth about ourselves that many times we're not all that interested in seeing. And these parables definitely do this. Now here's the sneaky part. It's going to seem like this parable is about your internal life. And it is to a large degree. But I think the big piece out of this parable that's a difference maker for you and I is that if we pay attention to this parable, it actually opens up for us a way that we can change the world. That you can have an impact and an influence on people around you, and it scales in incredible ways, because maybe you'll change the whole world. I hope you do. But maybe it will just change your marriage in ways that are much needed. You've desired for a long time. You wish things were different, and this could do it. Or maybe it would change your extended family or your relationship with your parents or your kids or your workplace. Like, it really could change it. And I think that's kind of the sneaky side door. So let me just start with these two truths. These will be obvious in the parable. The world is a broken place, and I am a broken person. And of course, I want you all to personalize that. The world is a broken place, and each of you are a broken person. None of you were 10s when it came to spiritual or relational or responsible. So maybe a little participation. Everyone agrees with that, right? The world is a broken place, and you and I are broken people. Can I just, real quick, just see a show of hands, like, do we all really agree with both of those? I won't make you raise your hand if you disagree, but like, these are so obvious to me. So the trick of this teaching isn't that one of these is true or one's more important or something like that, but it is important. Which one we think's a bigger deal? They're both true. I think it's an interesting question, if we're honest with ourselves, to say, do I think it's a bigger deal that the world is broken? Or do I think it's a bigger deal that I'm broken? Do I pay more attention to the idea that the world is broken? And by the world, I mean other people, and I mean the systems of this world, all those. Or do I pay more attention to the idea that I am broken? And I want you to think, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands on this one, just for a moment, like which way you kind of tilt in your everyday understanding of the world. You could judge yourself a little bit. You could think, well, do more words come out of my mouth about how broken I am? Like, am I doing a lot of confessing? Am I doing a lot of acknowledging of how wrong I am? Am I talking to my spouse and to my kids and to my friends and my coworkers about how I'm dropping the ball? Like, is there a lot of words like that coming out of my mouth? Or are there more words about how bad things are out there, how people should get their stuff together, you know what I mean, right? You could just ask yourself, well, do more words come out like to acknowledge your brokenness, or more words about the brokenness? You could think about how you spend your time. There's all kinds of ways to think about this. And it's such a significant question for our lives. And sneaky a little bit, I think, because if you and I were interested in changing the world, and I hope that you are interested in changing the world with me and with Jesus, then you might think, well, I got to be solid, but there's a lot of problems out there. I need to focus on the problems that are out there. There's even ways to justify thinking more about the brokenness of the world rather than the brokenness of myself. So Jesus tells this story. It says, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. That's his audience. His audience, I'm not saying you, but his audience was a group of people who probably would raise their hand and say, yes, I'm broken and the world's broken. But on the whole, in their understanding of the world, they were much more prone to talk about how bad the world is, how broken it is, how other people have problems, than they were to talk about their own. They kind of minimized their own challenges and maximized the brokenness of this world. Jesus told this parable. 2 men went to the temple to pray. One, a Pharisee, and one, a tax collector. This isn't complicated. These are the 2 characters in the story. Jesus is hoping that you relate to one or the other of them. And let me just describe them to you, just so we all understand what this means. These are extreme characters. And Jesus gave us extreme characters so we could see it clearly. You may be on one side of this, but not as extreme as these 2. What is a Pharisee? In Jesus' day, a Pharisee was a very religious person who was very judgmental toward anyone who didn't follow all the rules, all the religious rules, right? I actually was in a setting recently where someone told a joke. I'm going to tell you this joke. They said, hey, what's the difference between a porcupine and the church? They said, well, a porcupine has pricks on the outside. And I don't know that I can argue with it on the whole. I'm not calling all of you. Not all of you. But it's true reputationally as a church. I mean, it's certainly true of some of us in this church that we are the Pharisees, that we're the ones who think of ourselves as righteous and look down on other people. That's what a Pharisee is. And then there's a tax collector. Now, a tax collector, it's important to know how extreme this is too. I mean, a tax collector was a category one worse than sinner from Jesus' perspective. I think the best parallel for a tax collector in our world is someone who is an abuser. It's an abuser. That's what the tax collector was doing. He was harming and hurting people in ways that were not justified, could never have been justified. And many times he was doing it to his own family, his own countrymen. And I don't know if some of you are abusers. Certainly there are abusers in the world and sadly in the church. And you might be someone who abuses other people with your words. You might be someone who abuses someone else physically. You might be guilty of abusing someone sexually. That's the nature of this. Jesus is trying to paint a picture like this dude's a horrible, horrible person. It might be that you're a drug abuser and that actually because of your abuse of drugs, your family pays the price for it. That would be a good picture of what Jesus is setting up here as the Pharisee and the tax collector. And no doubt within our church, we have some who sit at those extremes. I don't know who they are. But some of you are Pharisees. You are a judgmental person. You have your nose in the air. You look down on other people. You're religious and you think other people should follow the rules. And some of you are abusers. If you're an abuser with some momentum toward trying to find the grace of God, I'm glad you're here. If you're an abuser who is hiding in a place like this, trying to present as a church person and cover up yourself as an abuser, that's as bad as it gets. But most of us probably don't identify with one of the extremes of that. Jesus is painting the extremes just so we can see, but if it was in the middle and we had to tip toward one or the other, which one would we be? Actually, what I'm very, very confident of is we have people in our church, perhaps myself included, who aren't extreme Pharisees or abusers. We're socially aware Pharisees, or maybe socially aware abusers. You know how bad it looks on you if you get real haughty about it and you get real judgy and you walk around policing everybody. So you don't do that. You're a socially aware person. But that doesn't necessarily mean that in your mind, the way that you think about it, and actually in your more private moments and some conversations, you don't, communicate. You're just a socially aware Pharisee. Or potentially a socially aware abuser who's going to limit the knowledge of that to certain circles. All of us live on one side or the other. This is the question. Are you more prone? Are you more like a Pharisee? Or are you more like an abuser? Well, Jesus tells the story. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. And I give a tenth of all that I get. Now, I want you to entertain this idea for a moment. You might be a Pharisee. And the way that you would start to embrace the idea that you're a Pharisee and that you really care more about the broken world than you care about your own brokenness is, well, first of all, you employ God. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but God's always on your side. Whatever you think, whatever you believe, whatever you've aligned yourself with, it's you and God. And then there's the others. Those people. Here, it's robbers, evildoers, adulterers, and tax collectors. In our world, just make a list of anyone that is an outcast, and maybe certainly a sinner. And then listen to what he says. He's like, God, you and I are on the same page about this. It's those people out there. He says, thank you that I'm not like other people. And this is the grand mistake of the Pharisee. Get this. Some of us are Pharisees. We think we're more like God than like the abusers. Some of you think that. You think you're like God. Thank God I'm not like the other people. But any Christian view of the world, and maybe you want to disagree with Jesus about this, any Christian view of the Jesus would paint a different picture. There's God, and then there's all of us, and we're all sinners. And we're not all doing the same thing, and I'm not even saying it's all to the same degree, but if you think you're more like God than you are like the other evildoers, then you have created an image of yourself that, it's only going to result in Pharisaism. And you think the way the world's going to be a better place is for them to get in line. Let's go back just for a second. There's one more line I want to hit. I fast twice a week, and I give a tenth of all I get. This is classic religious Pharisaism. You justify yourself by the good things you're doing, the godly things you're doing, the rules you're following. Of course, there's nothing wrong with these rules. They are good things in and of themselves. But you've kind of made the idea that you follow the rules, that you're making some right choices. The identity that to you justifies you are more like God than you are like other people. That's the Pharisee. Passage goes on. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He wouldn't even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and he said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. This person also employs a prayer. But it's not a prayer of righteousness. It's not a prayer of God, you and I are on the same team. Let's thank God we're not like those people. This is a prayer that, you're kind of flinching a little bit as you're praying. Because he's very aware of his own brokenness. He's aware that he's betrayed his countrymen. He's been unfaithful to people who are around him. That's what abusers are. And it's almost like he's inching toward God. Sometimes I'll have people come into our church and they'll talk to me. Sometimes on the first week, a lot of times it's 6 months later, and they'll be like, I thought when I walked in, the walls were going to fall down. But why do people say that? Why do they feel that? It's like, well, because if you feel like you might be in the presence of God and you know you're off, it's a humble posture to say, I don't deserve this. I don't belong here. And actually, hear that humble posture. What's he saying? God, have mercy on me. God, don't give me what I deserve. God, I know what I deserve. God, I know how broken I am. God, I'm a sinner. And all I can do is get down on my knees, beat my chest and say, I don't deserve you. I don't belong here. But if you would be so kind and so gracious, would you have mercy on me? Which one are you? That's the question. Which one are you? We choose our posture, right? I think this is the best way I can kind of describe it. We either minimize our brokenness and focus on others, or we embrace our brokenness and we seek redemption from God. Now, let me live on this just for a moment because this is such a big deal. The idea that we minimize our own brokenness and focus on others is, of course, the way of the world. That's the way this whole world works. If this is you, you're actually in really, really good company. And I was starting to think of examples like where this shows up in life. And it's easy to come up with kind of big, massive examples like no one goes online. It could be Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is. No one goes online and sees people taking responsibility for their own brokenness and encouraging others. It's always the opposite. I minimize myself. I say, those out there are bad. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a political convention going on this week. And there will be another political convention going on next month. And I would bet you every dollar I have that at both of those conventions, none of them are taking this posture. You know what? We're kind of messed up. We need some help. I want to encourage the others out there. In our world, this is so foreign. But online world and political world is almost too simple. And I think actually gives us kind of an escape hatch not to think about ourselves. Because where I see this happen is in marriages. Where we minimize our own brokenness. And we focus on the brokenness of someone else. Where I see this happening is how we relate to our parents. And it might be that you're in your 30s and your parents are in their 60s and you're looking at them and you're minimizing your own brokenness and you are focusing on what they've messed up. Or it might be that you're a teenager and your parents are in their 40s. And what are you doing? You're minimizing your own brokenness and you're casting dispersions on the other. This is Pharisaism over and over again. It happens in our extended families. It happens probably with you and your boss. We minimize our own stuff. And we say the problem's out there somewhere. And this is why I think it's such a big deal that if the world's going to change, if I would like to change the world, it probably doesn't start with me trying to fix other people. It probably begins with me saying, you know what? Actually, maybe it's me. Some of you know my favorite story about G.K. Chesterton is that in 1908, the Times of London requested essays from a number of prominent authors, of which G.K. Chesterton was one, with this question. They asked, what is wrong with the world? And a number of people wrote in, and they, of course, gave brilliant explanations of things that are wrong with the world. And G.K. Chesterton wrote in, could have written a long essay. This is what he wrote. He said, Dear sirs, I am. How about before we look at what's all wrong with the world out there, all those people, all the people who frustrate me, that we stop minimizing ourselves. So there's, of course, the option then to embrace our brokenness. And here's the truth. There are people in this room, for sure, who embrace your own brokenness. And some of you do that in a healthy way. But one of the things that's fascinating to me about this passage is that I see many people embrace their own brokenness. They talk about themselves in their broken ways. But they just keep doing that again and again and again. And it never leads to grace. It never leads to healing. It never leads to redemption. People just have this kind of self-talk story about themselves. It says, I'm stupid. I messed up again. I'm nothing. I don't even deserve this. I don't deserve to live sometimes. And people sometimes have that posture, but they haven't gotten to the place in that posture where they could even almost inch into God and say, I don't want life still to be this way 10 years from now or 10 days from now. So God, would you have mercy on me, a sinner? In fact, if there's a prayer I want to ask all of you to pray every day this week, I wonder if you and I could just pray, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And at the conclusion of the story, Jesus says, I tell you the truth, that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. Now, I know it's been a few months since I did justified, sanctified, glorified, but this word really, really matters. How did the Pharisee, the religious person, the do-gooder, think in terms of, this is how I'll be justified before God? I'll give 1/10 of all that I get. I'll fast twice a week. I'll do a laundry list of good things, religious things. And if I do that, then I'll be justified before God. And this passage is another reminder to all of us who follow Jesus that if you follow Jesus and you still think it's your good deeds that are going to get you into heaven, you're seeing the world entirely wrong. The idea that you could do enough good, the idea that making the list of being disciplined, that's your path to God, it's a fool's errand. The path to God is to say, God, actually, I'm nothing like you. I'm a broken man. And I could even spend a little time getting specific about the things in my life that are not right, the places I project my brokenness on other people. God, only because of your son, Jesus, could I be forgiven, set free, made new, to live a different kind of life. It's beautiful. And it's actually right after this passage that Jesus says, so you may notice that those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And as important as that is for our own lives, for us to live lives of humility, for us to pray the prayer, God, have mercy on me, a sinner, I think it's important we don't leave today without saying it teaches us something about God. You know, God is relational. That's who he is. He's not some cosmic killjoy. He's not looking for you to do the next wrong thing or the next right thing. He's not keeping score with his pad. He's a father. He's a father who loves you, who wants you to acknowledge what you've done wrong, who will welcome you home at any point. This is who God is. God is love. He loves you just the way you are. And when you can acknowledge the way you are, which is not Jesus, not perfect, it opens up something in your relationship, just like when your kids can say, actually, Dad, I need your help. God is relational. God is relational, but also we are relational. We, human beings, are made in the image of God. It shouldn't surprise us that if God is primarily love, if he's primarily relational, that we are relational beings. That you were designed to love people and be loved by them, to know people and be known by them. That, I probably say this too often, but if you just look at your life, I can promise you this is true. If your relationships are good right now, life is good for you. It doesn't matter what your job is, how much money you have, what your title is, what kind of house you live in. It doesn't matter at all. If your relationships are good, life is good. And if your relationships are terrible right now, life is terrible. It, again, does not matter how much money you have, what your title is, what kind of house you live in. Everything is relational. And so it shouldn't surprise us that church is relational. Church is not a 60 to 65 minute service, and church certainly isn't a building. Church is a community where we're friends with each other, where you tell me about your life and I tell you about mine, where we support each other through our tough times, where we encourage one another. And I know we live in America and it can seem like, oh no, actually church is a theater. We sit in rows and we look at the back of each other's heads, and I come for the show. But fundamentally, that's just off in our understanding of God and church. And it's one of the reasons why next month, during a series I'm going to do over Romans 12, the most beautiful chapter to me in all of the Bible. It's going to be so much fun for 5 weeks. I want to ask our whole church to get into circles instead of rows. I'm going to give a chance next month for hopefully everyone in our church who wants to say, hey, for 5 weeks, yeah, I'll group up and I'll kind of talk about life and meet some friends and, Talk about Romans 12. But in order to do that, I need some people. We need some people who would be the kind of people who'd say, yeah, I'd like to make some friends. I'd organize one of those groups. I'd be responsible for that. You might be in a group already. You may not be in a group already. Either way is fine. You might be brand new to our church. You may have moved here from another place. You might, whatever. We will vet you, okay? Like, I'm not gonna let just anybody do this. But let me give you the grid. Earlier, I asked you how responsible you are, how relational you are, and how spiritual you are. Let me give you some thresholds here. If you're like at least a 6 on responsible, like you'll call people back, you can do this. Relational, you should probably be a 7, right? It's a relational environment. You can gather some friends, but if you're a nice person who can carry a conversation, you can do this. Spiritual, I actually only need you to be a 3. Genuinely. The content is provided. You're just hosting a conversation about this. And I'm hoping that about 20% of the people in this room will give me the next 5 minutes up front here while the rest of you walk out. So if you're open to that at all, in just a moment, I'm going to have you stand and pray. And I would like to ask you to come down front. I promise I won't take more than 5 minutes, and we will send you on your way. For the rest of you, you can go. Would you stand right now? I'm going to pray for us. Well, I really hope that was helpful for integrating faith with life. Listen, if you're in Northwest Indiana, I'd love to have you join us in person. Head over to suncrest.org and plan your visit.